Hello, my name is Jared Wilson, and welcome to my AEP 880 Module 7 mini case study. Identifying the main characters in this case study, you have Mr. Rolnick, who is the classroom teacher. You have Joel Pham, who is the student in Mr. Rolnick's class. You have Mrs. and Mr. Pham, Joel's parents. You have Mrs. Smith, which is another teacher. You also have other students' parents involved. And then some of the big highlights or big issues that are really targeted for this mini case study is the lack of communication and misconceptions. So diving into question number 1, Mr. Rolnick provided various opportunities for students' parents to volunteer, but Mrs. and Mr. Pham did not volunteer in the ways in these ways. So Mrs. Smith also suggested that one reason for their lack of participation might be their own experience as students in schools, and then to highlight the factors that might be keeping them from volunteering and describing any personal experiences that I personally have had that were similar to this occurrence. So first, I highlighted that there are many reasons why a family may choose not to volunteer in the classroom. This course has really highlighted that many of those reasons often points towards a difference in cultural backgrounds. There could have been cultural differences for how families experience school. The case study does highlight that Mrs. Smith knows more about the school experience that the Phams have experienced, and they could still be having those negative feelings towards school or sharing their culture where they experience that negative educational experience. The Pham family also could have experienced something in the past that does not make them feel welcomed enough to share their culture or build a strong relationship. Building a stronger relationship with the family is the best way for Rolnick to see parent engagement. Mr. Rolnick should also analyze how Joe is being supported, because those supports could be there, but may look vastly different than the other students in the class that may share his same cultural behaviors. This really relies on Mr. Rolnick to step back, analyze the situation, and see if there are supports there for Joel that he is not used to seeing, just because of those different cultural barriers, and how he can overcome them and how he can build that relationship more with Joel's family. Looking at number 2, how should Mr. Rolnick and the other teachers and administrators reach out to parents and other caretakers who might have experienced school as a hostile environment when they were students? Describe how any experiences that I have with those similar occurrences. How would the staff even know if there is a barrier? And how could you have eliminated this situation from happening? Mr. Rolnick and other staff members can begin working to create a more inclusive culture to help support and build relationships with diverse families. In some cases, they have families that have negative perceptions about schools. In this case, it is critical that schools work together with the families to build stronger relationships. It includes bringing up some of those worries and feelings families may be having and how they can work to make sure their students are not experiencing the same. Rather than avoiding the situation, bring it into context, having those discussions, having those opportunities to communicate would definitely benefit all parties involved. I commonly experience parents who were embarrassed about reading groups. I commonly experience parents who were embarrassed about reading groups and the social weight that they can carry. And how I overcome that is I'd like to communicate with my families that all students do meet with me in reading groups and consistently rotate within groups to help students avoid feeling that they are being judged due to reading levels from their peers. And I believe that this transfer of information tends to be lost from teacher to teacher. So due to this information, or due to this loss of communication, year after year, teachers are seeking to understand why why there may be barriers behind family engagement. And one way to reduce the situation from happening is to establish and facilitate strong family relationships. When schools are able to use these relationships, families may feel more comfortable each year working closely with the teachers. So to highlight, one example I see is those reading groups and how we can overcome them, how I personally run them in my classroom so that their kids aren't feeling isolated. And I communicate that with the parents that here's what's going on. Here's how I'm doing this to avoid any type of uncomfortability. Here's what I'm doing in case they have that. It's definitely something parents bring to my attention, and something that I always want to foster a relationship with the kid and an environment in the classroom that does not single them out or make them feel singled out for any reason. Question number 3. Mr. Rolnick appeared to assume, because he didn't take advantage of family involvement opportunities that he created, and that Mr. and Mrs. Pham were disinterested in their son's education. What are some ways parents can be involved and demonstrate interest in their child's education other than volunteering at school? And then describe any personal experiences. So it appears that Mr. Rolnick assumed, because they didn't take advantage of the opportunities he created. The big thing is he created those rather than communicating with them, to see if there was any way that they could have middle ground and find a way to support their child. So one way that Mr. Rolnick could have provided opportunities for Mr. and Mrs. Pham to participate in the classroom is to provide learning opportunities that incorporate diverse cultures. So Mr. Rolnick could have presented opportunities to help provide for families to participate in more controlled environment. Another option could have been to provide more input through letters or possibly video calling. Maybe that barrier is that they don't want to be personally in the school. Physically, they do not like the environment. Find ways around that, ways to communicate that so that they do not have to. And it could be my first school, for example, had a large population of immigrant families from Mexico. And within my classroom, I learned that many of my families did not engage in their child's education. In many cases, there was a fear of being a hindrance due to language barriers. That was a huge one. But also another major barrier consisted of immigration policies. In almost all cases, I found that the families cared, they wanted their child to be supported, but relied heavily on my instruction to lead that support. So they were looking for me to lead it and were willing to support me, but did not want to step on my toes and did not want to clash with me. And I found that whenever I was able to build those relationships with them, we were able to communicate more. Correlation for this assignment. The assignment was focused on being able to establish communication and engagement avenues for diverse families. This assignment allowed me to analyze a specific situation in which a teacher is having difficulty identifying relating to family engagement with a diverse family. It allowed me to directly implement strategies that a teacher could use to increase that engagement. And the first step of this process was to determine what cultural differences may play a role in this misconception and identify barriers that allowed for different approaches to attempt to mend the fam relationship with the school and demonstrate positive learning environments. To make it relevant, the assignment required me to reflect back on major concepts discussed in this course. The first major concept was misconceptions, and the teacher in this case study displayed misconceptions about why a family was not engaging in a child's learning, and it prompted me to analyze what cultural reasons this family may be not supporting their child or maybe supporting them differently than what is commonly seen here in the United States or in Mr. Rolnick's case. The next step was to formulate creative avenues for families to incorporate their cultures into their child's educational practice. And then my reflection piece was that the assignment gave me an opportunity to directly practice some of the skills that have been taught in this course. I was able to focus on how a teacher can work towards creating a better relationship between the school and families. Rather than a teacher leaning on misconceptions, I was able to identify diverse engagement opportunities. And as a leader, it's important for me to begin facilitating opportunities for family to engage in school activities. It's also important for me as a leader to work with teachers to seek more understanding rather than working on those misconceptions. Here's a reference list that just outlines the case that was included in this assignment. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.